Welcome to latest Seahawks Draft Blog live stream. Rob Staten, Robbie Williams, Adam Nathan with you here today. We're going to run through the latest talk surrounding the NFL draft and how this may impact the Seahawks. We're just 2 weeks and a day away from finding out what the Seahawks are going to do. It's funny to think that actually in 2 weeks the Russell Wilson trade it'll be done. We'll all know what the Seahawks got out of that trade in the end. It feels somewhat sad actually saying it like that. It's been quite fun over the last year to have all of these draft picks and to sort of wonder what the Seahawks are going to do. And, in a couple of weeks' time, we'll know what they spent those draft picks on. But there's been quite a few things in the news over the last few days, guys, that I wanted to touch on that I didn't really see coming. That it did feel like it was quite a predictable process, this. We'd had the quarterback pro days and typically people were speaking very positively about those. The combine went very well for the quarterbacks. We've had a bit of stuff. I don't really understand why the media feels like they have to hammer Will Levis all the time. I find that slightly ridiculous. And now it seems to be CJ Stroud, and we're going to come on to that based on something that Michael Lombardi said about him, which I don't really know what to make of that. But we've got all sorts in the minute, Robbie. We've got Adam Schefter suddenly flirting with the idea that the Texans are not going to take a quarterback. I've seen, that also Peter King's talking about that. We've got Lance Zierlein, who's very connected in Houston, mocking Tyree Wilson's second overall. People are now picking up on comments by D'Amico Ryans saying, we don't need a franchise savior at number 2. We don't want to put the pressure of somebody on that who we pick second overall. People are saying, the Texans can wait till next year for a quarterback. What's going on here? Like, how has it come to be that Tyree Wilson could be the second overall pick, according to the person who is possibly most connected with regard to the Texans in Lance Zierlein? He's predicting that in his latest mock draft. That people are suddenly speculating that's the case. Chris Sims has come out this week and has decided that Will Anderson's no good anymore. He's the third tier pass rusher. He's the 5th ranked edge in Chris Sims' class, and Tyree Wilson is apparently Myles Garrett. So, what's going on, Robbie? I've titled this video, Go Home 2023 NFL Draft, You're Drunk. Because to me, I don't know what to make of all this. Is it all just a load of typical smokescreen stuff 2 weeks out? Or are we going to be really surprised in a couple of weeks when we see how the top 10 unfolds?
I think we're going to be a little surprised, but I'm not super surprised by the Texans. We had said early on in the draft when we kind of figured out when where everyone had, finally placed and the Texans were picking second, we had talked about there's no guarantee they're going to take a quarterback. I mean, I think even I said in our last podcast, I didn't think that it was a guarantee that, they were going to take a quarterback. I think people can get, all kind of, eyeballing the quarterbacks in the top because they're the franchise players, right? But I think for D'Amico Ryans, there's probably a good chance that he wants to go defense and pick a player that he feels like can come in and make an immediate impact. And I don't know if he thinks maybe some of these quarterbacks can. And it's going to be interesting to see what will really happen. I think it's if they do take Tyree Wilson, I mean that's going to be something that completely will shock everybody, right? But I mean, was it just a couple of years ago when the Jags took what's his name in the first overall pick, and we didn't expect that. I mean, there's things that happen, and like you said 2 weeks ago too, people can tend to talk themselves into a player. They can talk themselves into. I mean, shoot, we do it all the time. I've talked myself into players, like just sitting here, like I don't want this guy for a specific reason. I want these guys, and I'm sold on it. And whatever I say, that's what I mean. That these are the guys that I want. And I think when they evaluate their players and go through their process, I think they could get into that same kind of scenario where they're going to stick to kind of like, well, this is the guy we want, and they're going to talk themselves into that reason. I think it's going to be a fun draft process. I think it's fun about it is like there's just so many unknowns at the top of the draft that you just really are unsure what direction. I mean, Carolina's taking a quarterback. After that, it's a wild card because you don't know if Arizona is going to stay there, if they're going to trade down. You're pretty sold on the Indianapolis Colts taking a quarterback. I mean, that's pretty set in stone. And then, who knows what Seattle's going to do. It's going to be really interesting.
Adam, I've wondered a couple of things over the last 24 hours. the first thing I wonder is whether teams just think this is a really crap draft. Is that actually people are sort of looking at this and going, the lack of legit blue chip players at the top of the draft is a problem. And someone like Houston might go, well, we've had a look at the quarterbacks. We're not sure. We're not sold on the other players. So what we're going to do is we're just going to get the sharp elbows out and barge in on Arizona's party. If they're talking about, hey, look, come and trade with us, and you can get up and get that next best quarterback, they're going, oh, hang on a minute. If somebody's willing to give the Arizona Cardinals a great haul, what we'll do is we'll put out into the media that we're kind of not that sure about the quarterbacks actually, and maybe we fancy a bit of that, which is kind of what I think is happening here. And they want teams to come to them and say, what are you going to give us to move up to number 2? With the idea that they might be prepared to move down to 7 or 8 or 11, get a huge offer to move down, still take a player who they perhaps value in the same range that they would have taken at number 2 anyway, and get a whole bunch of stock for next year and kind of just push things down the line. I wonder if there's some of that going on there, Adam. But the key thing about that is, because that's the Texans' dilemma. That's for the Texans to sort of work through. I think that might be what's going on here. But what I'm more bothered about the Seahawks, Adam, and what that means for Seattle, who are sat at number 5. If the league has decided that this draft it ain't that good, what do the Seahawks do? What's their whole approach to this? If teams are sort of looking at these players and going, I'm not sure.
Well, ultimately, Rob, I feel sorry for you. I mean, Robbie and I can pitch up every fortnight and, we do our hour, we watch a bit of tape, we listen to a few talking heads, say a bit of rubbish on the radio. You have to actually analyze this stuff. And we are so beyond the point of any rational new takes coming out from these people. I've always wondered that if the draft was just done in January and we just got all this nonsense out the way, because we are really in the nonsense period now, aren't we? And I wonder if we're at the point with there's such a paralysis by analysis that everyone's twisting themselves into knots that whereby 2 months ago there were, 12 great players, were now, are there 8? Are there 6? And, the NFL's determination to dominate the landscape and dominate the news cycle, I almost feel like it actually has a negative effect on how the draft is viewed at this time of year, because people just have to say stuff. And you end up in this position where you think you've got a fairly decent idea in February and, going into the combine or whatever. And it just becomes so twisted now that I hope the team don't twist themselves in knots in the way that we do, wondering what the hell's going on, because there's nothing really of any value that's been coming out of anything for a month or so, really. But we're having to analyze it and try and work out what everyone's thinking. And we're in this position where we're now like, well, everyone's rubbish. That's kind of the position we're in now. We don't know what we're doing. And I wonder if the draft could have just been 3 months ago, we might have been able to move on with our lives and have a nice spring.
I think the draft should be this week. I don't think there's any real need for another 2 weeks. We're seeing all these official visits happening now. I've long thought the draft process is too long. There's too much of a gap between. It's weird how you go from the combine to straight into free agency almost like immediately. Like you basically have a weekend and then it's free agency starts after the combine. So there's no time at all until things shift into gear. And then there's this like really long period where it seems to drag on forever. The pro days drag on. Then you've got loads of time after that, and even now you've got the official visits happening this week. But then you have a couple of weeks after that to sort of formulate what you're going to do. And I don't know. Could you have the draft this week and just get on with it? I think you could possibly have a bit of that, and we could avoid some of this, as you called it, Adam, paralysis via analysis. But I don't know. I'm starting to get a feeling, Robbie, and maybe it's wrong. Maybe it's the wrong way to look at this, but just that maybe there is something in the way that a lot of people are talking here. Maybe this just is not a very hotly anticipated draft. Somebody just mentioned in the comments section that Michael Lombardi, on top of what he said about CJ Stroud, which I'm going to get onto, has also said that people in the league, they're not that enamored by Will Anderson. And I have to say, I kind of get it. When I listened to Christian, I sat down yesterday, I'd had a conversation with Jeff on Twitter, DM, and we'd had a bit of a chuckle at the over-the-top nature of Chris Sims's rankings and the hyperbole of putting Anderson as the 5th best edge rusher, putting him in the 3rd tier sounds ridiculous. And then I actually listened to Chris Sims and I thought, yeah, do you know what? Even as someone who is a relative fan of Will Anderson, I can kind of hear a lot of what he's saying. There's always been a lot of stunts in Alabama's defensive system. And I've seen people on Twitter and on YouTube going, watch this great play by Will Anderson where he stunts. And I'm thinking, right, okay. As soon as I hear anybody promoting a stunt as a good play on a YouTube clip to highlight something that someone's done well, I'm turning that video off, because a stunt is just a cheat code. It's a cheap way to get pressure, to manufacture pressure. It's no different than the Seahawks putting Bobby Wagner in the A gap and having Jamal Adams screaming off the edge with Wagner taking the protection away. It's a cheat to get through to the quarterback. And when you watch Will Anderson, there's a lot of stunts. There's a lot of unblocked pressure. There's a lot of backside runs, to get to the running back, bring them down, TFL, great stuff. What there isn't a whole bunch of on tape from Will Anderson is winning off the edge, 1v1, bending the arc, doing the kind of things that you expect. I've seen people saying that Anderson's get off is amazing. He has a false step. He does take too long to get into the tackle. So the thing is, Robbie, is I understand where a lot of these concerns are coming from. Now, I think there's a lot to like about Anderson as well. His power, his explosion, his ability to defend the run. I do think that if you put him in the right scheme, and I think Seattle is the right scheme for him, that he can create a lot of TFLs. I think he's probably more of a 10 sack guy who gets up to 15 regularly, between 10 and 15. I don't think he's a Bosa. I don't think he's a Garrett. He's not going to be a game wrecker for you, but I do think there's some value there. But I understand what people are saying about him. And if people are now saying the league's not that crazy about Will Anderson, that Tyree Wilson, who I think is just a bull rush specialist, essentially, could go ahead of him. And if people don't like the quarterback class, what do they like? Because there's no left tackle who's going to go in the top 10. There's cornerbacks who are going to go in the top 10, but there's no cornerback like the two that went very early last year. What is this draft? And what does that mean for Seattle, who are sat there 5th, hoping they're going to get this great franchise-changing player, number 5? Is that player there? That's sort of, maybe that's a bit negative on my behalf, but I have been sort of wondering a little bit, if teams at number 2 were not that crazy about the options, what does a team at number 5 think?
Yeah, I still think it's a top quarterback heavy draft. I mean, top 4. I think the 4 quarterbacks, they all have flaws. They all have, some positive things about it. And then after that, there's going to be the talk of, Will Anderson, Tyrese Wilson, Jalen Carter. These guys are going to be talked about, but they all have flaws. And there's not that guy where you're just like, you're super secure in, their ability to come in and do that and come in and play and immediately be a game changer for you. But I mean, honestly, the last time I remember us doing that was Aaron Curry at 3, and it was a terrible draft. He was supposed to be the surefire guy, and he was not it. So, I think with any guy that you draft, there's going to be, this is why people are talking themselves into a certain player, because maybe they're just not, they're not looking towards the negative stuff. They're just trying to look to, the good stuff. And for me, like, I think someone just said right here, like the Stroud thing, like I've talked myself into liking CJ Stroud, and I've didn't like him all season. All season, I was like, no to CJ Stroud. Then he played against Georgia, and I was like, all right. And then he pro day, I was like, I want him on my team. Like, I've talked myself into the ability of wanting like CJ Stroud, and the fact that it's a Seahawks fan. Like, there's just things like that. And I think people's emotions are still involved in this game, and evaluating players and these kids that are coming out. It's really going to be hard. I don't know, man. I don't know how you evaluate the draft. You just got to hope for the best, really.
Had a super chat from Kevin, who says, it's the Bolke effect. You're the smartest person in the room. Trent Bolke, of course, is the Jaguars GM, who took Trevon Walker instead of Aiden Hutchinson a year ago. Funnily enough, we're talking about Chris Sims' rankings. In fairness to Sims, he said that Aiden Hutchinson could be one of the best pass rushers in the league very, very quickly. And he had him at number 1 in his rankings a year ago. And Hutchinson has had that kind of impact. So if we are looking for, should we read into anything with this, Sims he got that one right. And in fairness, he's had some hits on quarterbacks. He also had some misses on quarterbacks. And I thought his quarterback rankings a year ago, he was changing it every single week. And he wasn't talking about the quarterback classes like a bunch of third rounders, which he should have been doing. So, hit and miss is how I would describe it a little bit. But he's had some really big hits. But Trent Baalke overthought it a year ago. And that's what Kevin's getting at here. Thanks for your super chat. He says he hopes that the Texans take Tyree Wilson. And then he asked for some thoughts on Sim's ranking of Will Anderson, which I've given there. But Kevin, thank you for the super chat. If you have a question, super chat it, and we will come to it ASAP. We will come to those. So before I go on to Stroud, to sort of finish this point on, how teams are viewing the draft, it brings me back to a player that we've talked about an awful lot, and that's Jalen Carter. And all of a sudden now you're seeing people talk about Jalen Carter again. He is the trendy pick for the Seahawks at 5. I saw something today, I can't remember who it was, suggesting that maybe the Texans could end up taking Jalen Carter at 2 after all that they've said here. I've seen it being suggested again that he could go at number 3. He suddenly seems to be, his sort of stock is going upwards again. Maybe it's just because water's under the bridge a little bit with that legal issue which happened at the Combine. But I did wonder, Adam, if this is indicative again of people going, do you know what? We're not crazy about the draft class. We're not crazy about the players. A lot of people think Jalen Carter is the best player in the draft. He is very rare. What he shows, him at his best, is incredibly rare. And that it might be that he goes earlier than a lot of people, including myself, have been thinking, because people just go, we are not crazy about this draft class. We're going to have to take this guy and hope for the best because he has got the talent, and we'll just have to work on that and take that risk. It makes me wonder a little bit if there is a bit of that going on. I stand by everything that I've said with regards to Jalen Carter and the Seahawks and continue to think it's very unlikely they'll take him because there's just so much going on there. There is so much. He's possibly the most complicated player I think I've ever covered. Maybe it's just because I know a lot of the stuff that's going on with him. He's the most complicated character question mark I've ever come across since starting this blog in 2008. And that's part of the problem. People like to take things in isolation. The legal situation is sorted now, so it's fine. Well, no, teams have got to investigate exactly what happened that night. What was his role in the racing that has apparently happened or has allegedly happened? What happened after, if there was a race? What was his sort of movement after that? Because it's been all sorts of things have been reported about what happened there. I've watched the body cam video when he's been challenged by the police as to whether he was racing or not. It's not a great watch, quite frankly. So that's one issue. Then you've got the conditioning and how he looks after his body, and then you've got Todd McShay talking about the practice habits. And I'm aware, as far as I know, he basically did whatever he wanted at Georgia, and they just went, as long as he's there on game day, that's fine. That's how we're going to manage him. Is if he's there for the game and he's playing, that's fine for us. We'll deal with the other stuff. He ain't going to be able to get away with that in the NFL. And then there's all sorts of stuff about his background and his upbringing and stuff like that that's been reported on. We put the Bob McGinn quote that touched on that. I've heard some of that stuff myself. But Bob McGinn's his anonymous scouting sources reported on that as well. So it's multiple strands you could throw his decision making in there too, which is why I don't think the Seahawks I think with the Malik McDowell thing and stuff like that, they've been burnt. They've promised to learn from the mistakes. There's a lot going on here. I don't think they will take him. But the point I'm kind of rambling on a bit here, Adam. But the point I'm trying to make is, if it is a bad draft class, is someone going to go, yeah, we know all of that, but we're picking second, we're picking third, we're picking 6th, 5th, 7th, whatever. It's just there's just nobody else in this draft. We're going to take him. We're going to take him early.
I think he obviously becomes a fascinating case study for a lot of teams, and the security of your general manager and your head coach will have to come into it, because obviously you have got the downside potential, which there's so much of it that if it didn't go right, you couldn't possibly say you weren't warned. There's so much of it about that would suggest that there are red flags, and perhaps that's unfair on a kid, but it's very difficult for a GM to say, well, look, we didn't expect this from him, when it's pretty clear, what we've seen in the past, what we're going to see in the future, potentially with him. Looking at it from a Seahawk prism, when you said about the show today, I was thinking about what we might talk about, and what I can tell from the Carter versus quarterback conversation is that, well, you've got Geno, so Carter becomes sort of the more win now player. To you've got your quarterback, so don't waste pick. Go and get the best guy you can and put him in that defense, and maybe he can revolutionize the team. And I'm looking at the 2024, that team is a bit far ahead, but there's a number of players that are on the current roster that their contract situation is not going to be particularly clear in 2024. You're looking at both safeties, both current linebackers on the roster. Geno, what's going to happen with him? Disley, Tyler Lockett, there's always rumors about his retirement, as he gets a bit older. And I do get this idea of being in a win now position potentially if you take Carter. But if the Seahawks did do that and didn't win right now, my worry would be that you could kind of be in this situation going into 2024 where you've got this defensive tackle, and but the team around it could require so much work that I can't really work out if we're in a transitional period with the way the roster is, or a win now thing. And I think I've been a quarterback guy the whole way through since November when we started talking about this. But the more I think about the current construction of the roster, I know people talk about the risk of someone like a Richardson, but I think that it could be such a risk the way the roster could be constructed if they didn't take a guy for the future at the quarterback position, and it left themselves with sort of like the Jets are always a team that have got no quarterback but a great defensive tackle, and it sort of doesn't leave them with anything to hang your hat on. I think from a Seahawk perspective with Carter, that's what concerns me the most, because I just don't see where the long-term future is with him if they don't win literally right now.
That's a very interesting point, that, and that's the other thing is Carter is viewed as sort of like he comes in and he's a great, they've got Aaron Donald, there's people talk in those terms, like he comes in and that's it, he just has this amazing impact. Quinnen Williams, when he came into the league, had none of the concerns really that we're talking about here. The only thing with Quinnen Williams is there was a little bit of a concern that he was a one-year wonder, that he had one amazing, unbelievable season at Alabama, and that was it. It took him 3 years to work it out in the NFL. And I would say that would be a conservative estimate for Jalen Carter. Jalen Carter, he has to get his conditioning right before he can, what we saw against Ohio State, it's okay, deciding week to week when you're at Georgia, I won't go to that meeting. I won't go to that lifting session, or, as what Tom McShay's been saying, his effort wasn't always great. He wouldn't take to coaching. That won't cut it at the NFL. You have to be on it. And if you're not, what happened against Ohio State when he was blowing out of his arse is going to happen every single week, because he's going to be expected. You don't draft someone 5th overall to play 25% of the snaps. You draft someone in that range because they're going to play the bulk of the snaps. Aaron Donald's an impact series to series, isn't it? When he would take a rest for the Rams against Seattle, we'd all be thinking, please be injured. Like, please have some kind of like hamstring strain or something, so he's not going to come back out. It would be you'd raise an eyebrow at him being on the sideline. Jalen Carter can't be on the sideline for 75% of the game, as a rookie or even in year 2. He's got to be out there. So this just isn't going to work. Otherwise, it's going to be like against Ohio State when it's okay to play Mississippi State, play a portion of the snaps, have a really big impact. Like one of the videos I've seen on Twitter was that somebody said, this is 3 back-to-back snaps by Jalen Carter. Look at the impact he had there. This is not 3 different series. This is 3 back-to-back snaps. I was watching it thinking, yeah, great. He's very capable of having a great series and getting the defense off the field. What you need to see is him play a whole game where he's sort of impacting every series, and that's what you need to see. And his condition isn't right. If his attitude isn't right, it just isn't going to happen. And that's part of the problem. So it could end up being that he is no less of a long-term project as Anthony Richardson. Because if it takes 2 years for Jalen Carter to become a dominant 75 to 80% snap guy on your defensive line and it takes 2-3 years like it did Quinn and Williams, that's the same time frame as Anthony Richardson, isn't it? Unless you are saying, okay, for the first 2 years of his career, he's going to be a rotational defensive lineman. And by the way, we're just going to have to hope that he's okay. And one of the other things, Robbie, that people are saying, and I'm not buying this either. I don't know if you saw the Richard Sherman, Quandre Diggs podcast. I was listening to it today. And at the end, Sherman just says, what you're doing at number 5. And Quandre Diggs said, I hope that they draft Will Anderson. And then Sherman brought Jalen Carter on and said it would be okay to draft Jalen Carter because Bobby Wagner's on the team. And they could give KJ Wright a call and Cliff Averill. And they could. And I'm thinking, well, what are they going to do? Are they going to ask Cliff Averill to follow him around every day for like 6 months? Because what happens after the draft? You have a rookie minicamp, and then you're left to your own devices until training camp, essentially. So you're guaranteeing somebody $30 million. You're making, someone like Jalen Carter a multimillionaire, and then you're saying, right, off you go. You can't make him work out. You can't make him be in the facility. You could request that he stays in Seattle rather than going back to Florida or Georgia. You can make that request, but I don't think you can force him to stay in the Pacific Northwest where he knows nobody. And I don't think you can force Bobby Wagner to babysit the guy, or Cliff Averill, or KJ Wright, who's basically been on the radio saying, don't draft the guy, by the way, and been quite vocal on that. You can't expect these guys to keep him grounded. And Bobby Wagner's only got a 1-year contract. What if Bobby Wagner leaves the team in a year? What happens then? Really, Robbie, what you need, and this is why I think they'll be so keen on Will Anderson, is you need this guy to be the next Bobby Wagner. You need the guy that you're going to draft a defensive player at number 5. They've got to be the heart and soul of the defense or the team for the next 10 years. It can't be drafting somebody who your older players that you brought back have to hold their hand, and then you just sort of. I think Pete Carroll will have sleepless nights between May and July if they draft Jalen Carter, because they'll not know. They'll not be able to. They can't follow him everywhere. They can't lock him away for 4 months or whatever it is. So, do you see what I mean? These are the kind of conversations I think we have to have as fans. I have got no problem with somebody saying, do you know what? I've taken all those concerns on board. I'm hearing what you're saying about the character concerns. I believe you, Rob, when you say the character. I'm not going to go into massive details because it's not appropriate for me to go into massive details. But I have been told a lot of stuff about Jalen Carter. But it's not. Some of those details are starting to come out. People are now hearing them. But if people acknowledge that and go, I still want to draft him, that's a fine opinion to have. I've got no issue with that whatsoever. I think part of the issue is sort of just not acknowledging there are any issues and just saying draft the guy anyway. That's what I can't be on board with. You have to embrace and appreciate the concerns. And I don't think the Seahawks are going to go down that road, Robbie. But there are a lot of people who think they will. Most of them are in the national media right now.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that's frustrating for me on this kind of argument is people tend to take it as it's defensive tackle at 5 or there's nothing else. Like, you have to take Jalen Carter because he's going to be what fixes the defense immediately. And I just don't think that's the case. I think there are plenty of players who could come in that we could draft later on that are going to be potentially the ability to play more snaps. They might not have the ceiling that Jalen Carter has. When the guy plays the way he's capable of playing, he could be an absolute dominant force, but you can't guarantee that. So if you draft him at 5, you're drafting on that potential possibility that he could be the guy, and that you're going to babysit him as much as possible to make sure that he is going to be what you need him. You're going to have him doing all the right things, eating all the right foods, hanging out with the right people. That's a lot of effort to put into to a player, but I can see why people would want that, like, just for the simple fact that, hey, you're gonna draft a guy at 5, then you should be pushing a bunch of development stuff into him to making sure he's going to be a great player anyways, regardless of what position he plays. This is why I fall on the quarterback spectrum of things, because I want to see a quarterback of the future. I think it would be absolutely fantastic to have traded Russell Wilson and secured the possibility of getting the quarterback of the future that would be someone that we could play for the next 10 years. And I just think that, to me, seems more appealing. Maybe I just like shiny things. I don't really know, but that's just, for me, something that seems like a smarter use of the resources. And I feel like that was kind of in their plan the whole time. And so that's what I'd rather do. I think there's some really good defensive linemen in this draft. I think there's the ability to draft some guys that can be impact players without having to, make the decision to draft. And Jalen Carter may end up being a dominant force, and we may look back in 5 years and be like, meh, if we did it. But I'm hoping that we make the right decision at 5, and we won't look back, well, if we would have had that guy instead of this guy. But we've done that multiple years already. So for me, it's just quarterback. That's the way I want to go.
Yeah, I don't think anybody should do that with Jalen Carter. I think if they pass on him, you have to just accept that the risks involved, and it's not one thing. It's not just a legal issue. It's not just the practice habits. It's not just the work ethic and approach and application towards his career. It's not just the background. It's not just the conditioning. It's all of those things that you have to consider. And I don't think you could have a go at any team for deciding not for us. You just can't. He's given teams every reason to go, we're going to let somebody else deal with that. And it's a massive shame. It was put to me by somebody, really, he doesn't really understand what he's potentially going to miss out on here, because he is so talented. And if he had a sort of just, and part of it might be just the way that he's, because every player is different. Not every player gets the kind of the privileges and the benefits of, an upbringing that allows you to maximize your potential as a pro athlete. That's just simple, and I suspect there's a bit of that involved here. But he's gonna potentially cost himself a lot of money because of the last 6 to 8 months. Year, because I suppose you can even go back to April when he was talking about, I've got to get my conditioning right, and that's a shame. It is a real shame. I hope it works out for him. I hope if he ends up in like going to the Eagles or something like that, I think it'd be perfect for him, and I think he could have an amazing career. And I hope he does. I hope he has a great career, and we're all talking about that. But if he has a great career at the Eagles as the 10th overall pick, there's not one part of me that'll be going, oh, should have taken him. He's given teams a reason not to. So you kind of just have to accept that he might succeed somewhere else. And if the Seahawks decide to pass, then that's it. And I do think they will pass. I genuinely think they want somebody who is going to be like the foundation for the next decade of Seahawks football. And I don't think you can say that Jalen Carter is necessarily going to do that. But it's a conversation we'll keep talking about, because the national media keep putting him with Seattle. And look, if they do draft him, I'll say what I always say. I will happily come on here and say, I got that wrong. Got it wrong. They were prepared to take him because they have, and I will eat that and own up, and it's fine. And if they did take him, and I'm sure you would both agree, we may have a conversation about it immediately afterwards. But I hope he is the next Aaron Donald if the Seahawks draft him. I don't want him to fail so that I can sit there and go, whoa, I told them not to take him. Like, that's bullshit. I want, if they draft him, I hope he's the best defensive lineman in the league.
I like what you said there, because I feel like this gets lost on just a lot of fans in general, not just Seahawks fans, but like people get so hung up on like, oh, you want to take this guy, you're an idiot. Oh, you want to take this guy, you're an idiot. I'm like, we all want the same damn thing. We all want to win. And if like when people were so mad that we drafted Kenneth Walker last year, and we were like, no, he's going to be a good player, they weren't bitching when he was scoring touchdowns. And we like if we draft Jalen Carter and he comes in and he's wrecking fools, I'm not going to be like, wow, I wish he wasn't, so we could say we were right. No, I'm going to be cheering like, I'll buy a Jalen Carter jersey. I'll hang it up right behind me. Come on. Like, we want whoever we draft, we're going to want them to succeed. So
if they draft Jalen Carter the night of the first round, I'm going to be just watching the highlights of his best bits and getting excited. There's no, I find it strange. Like, it's a little bit like, I'd compare it to the Seahawks playing the Niners, and like someone from the 49ers web zone has gone on to like, invaded Seahawks Twitter, and everyone's kind of like being really bullish about their team. We're going to beat you. No, we're going to beat you. You're just your team sucks. No, your team sucks. And it's a bit like that. but the draft version. But it's totally different because we can sit here and have a discussion and raise some concerns about Jalen Carter and discuss how likely it is that the Seahawks draft him. But if the Seahawks do draft him, fine, whatever. They've made that call. We'll talk about the concerns again. We'll talk about the positives. And then we'll move on and hope for the best, won't we, Adam? We'll all just want the Seahawks to win. That's what we're all Seahawks fans. We want the Seahawks to win football games. That's all it's about. I don't care about being right or wrong. When I was wrong about Geno Smith, I accepted it. When I've been right about stuff, I haven't done videos going, I got that right. It's just, I just want us to win. I want to win a Super Bowl. I don't care how we do it. It doesn't have to be the way that I want it to be done. I just want us to win.
It's funny. I mean, I've said this to you on my show, I think, before, but it's slightly different for Robbie. But, people that live in Seattle, they can go to the games. They have Blue Friday. They have tailgating. They have the whole sort of Seahawk culture and community that envelops your life. And, whenever I go out there, I'm normally out there for a game a season, it's completely intoxicating and you get carried away in it. And it's just an amazing thing to be in. All we have here is the games. We watch the game at either 6 p.m., 9 p.m. or 1 a.m. And if they win, it's great. If they lose, it's not great. And, we lose hundreds of hours of sleep every year watching this team play. So I know people construe us sometimes as maybe on the more negative side, but kind of all we have to hang our hat on with this team is wins or losses. And let's be honest, in the last 7 or 8 years, they haven't really won as many games as we would have liked them to. They probably haven't, I can't think of many seasons in the last 6 or 7 where you've ended the season thinking they exceeded their talent. And I think that's why we're all been a bit pissed off for the last few years with the direction it's gone. And, I've been listening to podcasts in the last couple of weeks and with people eulogizing about Pete Carroll. Oh my goodness, what a great coach, what a great guy. And look, I'm sure he is. But again, from our situation where it's sort of wins and losses, the community element doesn't really do it for me because I'm not in it. And, I'm hearing Bucky Brooks say, just give Jalen Carter to Seattle, tuck him away up there and it'll be fine. And, Cliff Averill is this a summer camp? Like, is that what we're running here? Like, is this like a camp for, just everyone has fun and, the camp leader's a really great guy? Or are we a professional football team that are trying to win games? We want to win. And that's all that matters to us. And if they win with the people that I thought were going to be, if Geno takes us to a Super Bowl and I'm super wrong in everything I've said in the last 6 months, that'll be amazing because all I really want is the team to win. And it's not happened enough recently. And that's why I think we're all a bit frustrated.
It's funny, actually, because you talking about that a bit, it kind of made me feel like the way that people talk about Jalen Carter and just took him away in Seattle or, get Bobby to hold his hand or don't let him go anywhere for a few months. It's almost like when I've got 2 dogs, you guys have got dogs. If I'm going out somewhere, I don't trust the dogs to necessarily just have the roam of the house because, there's a lot of toys because they've got the kids in the house. So we'll put them in the kitchen. We'll put them in the kitchen. You can then leave the house and you're not worried that the sofa is going to be destroyed when you get back. Okay. It feels like they just want to lock Jalen Carter in the kitchen like he's a dog. Just like put him in the kitchen. He can't cause any problems then. And then when he gets to training camp, we'll let him out the kitchen and he can come back in the living room. Like it's just that you can't do that with a human being. You can't just lock him away. And he's going to have a life. He's going to have a lot of money as well, by the way. The minute that he's drafted 5th overall. So, you can't just say to a multimillionaire, you're not allowed to have a life now. You can't do that. Good luck
especially
with that.
Especially in like one of the 10 biggest cities in America or one of the big, it's not like some outpost in the middle of a desert or something. It's a massive city.
Yeah, I find it strange. And that just to reiterate that point again, I personally feel there's a very small chance they're going to draft him. Whether and if Will Anderson and Jalen Carter were there, I don't even think they'll spend any time thinking about that. I think Will Anderson is exactly the kind of player that they want to draft, and I think they'll run to the podium. We're going to get onto the quarterbacks a little bit again, but I do think there is some intrigue there and some interest. I think much more than people are willing to give credit to. So. Anyway, I want to get through these super chats and then I want to get on to what's been said about CJ Stroud, which I found interesting. This is from Ty. Cheers, lads. We are close. I'm excited. Yeah. I feel, thanks for the super chat, I kind of feel a little bit guilty. I was thinking the other day, I can't wait for this to be over. Like I'm actually looking forward to just knowing who the Seahawks are going to draft. And I thought, yeah, but you don't want you don't really want to do that because once in 2 weeks' time, when it's all done, you've got nothing then. You've got nothing to sort of think about until training camp and the games. And then when the training camp comes around, there's no more sort of like 2 first-round picks to think about and all stuff like that. It's gone. Like all of the excitement's gone. You've kind of got to try and enjoy the next 2 weeks. I don't think we've been allowed to enjoy the last sort of month, 6 weeks, because people have just gone to war about whether or not they should draft a quarterback or not. So I don't think we've had as much fun from this process as we could have done as a fan base. Ty again says, I'm okay passing on Carter and hitting more than I'm passing on Richardson, Levis, Young, and Stroud, and them hitting. You can live it down missing on an epic defensive tackle. I think there's some truth to that. I mean, look, if Anthony Richardson goes on and becomes the next Josh Allen, the Jeff Okudah trade was quite interesting. Mike Florio and Sims were talking about it earlier, and they put up the draft from, I think it was 2020 or whenever it was. And Jeff Okudah was the 3rd overall pick. And you look a little bit, there's Justin Herbert, 6th overall. And you're thinking, okay, they took a safe defensive player at number 3, which Okudah was. The Lions, okay, they might quite like Jared Goff at the minute. I bet they'd rather have Justin Herbert right now. And you can overthink these things. Sometimes it's better just to say, hey, we've got this physical specimen at quarterback who's got the potential to be really good. We're going to take a chance on him being really good. We're going to tell our coaches, you better get this. You've got to work on this guy and you make him great because he's got everything. And then the upside of that is franchise quarterback for a decade. That is what you have to contend with here. I don't think enough people are talking in those terms. Instead, people are just talking about this guy's crap. He had this much, completion percentage, or he threw this many interceptions, and they're not actually thinking, hang on a minute, this guy's got all the tools to be amazing, just like Justin Herbert, just like Josh Allen, just like Patrick Mahomes. Sometimes you've just got to go on, you've got to draft them and then develop them and make them great. And it's up to the coaches to do that. And Blackthorn says, thanks for doing this, boys. Appreciate it as usual. Quarterback at 5, Purdy, please. And I don't think he's talking about Brock Purdy there. I think he's just hoping for a quarterback. So one of the quarterbacks that kind of just assumed is not going to be there is CJ Stroud. And then Michael Lombardi goes on Vison, and I was on Vison's primetime show yesterday. If you go and check it out on YouTube, if you haven't already. But Michael Lombardi was on there, and he just casually dropped something out that I haven't seen mentioned elsewhere. And he said, everyone around the league knows CJ Stroud has coach ability and attitude problems. So is that just a smokescreen thing going on there, Robbie? Or is that maybe one of the reasons why the Texans are thinking about something else? And, if I think CJ Stroud would be just fantastic to get in and sit and develop and give a year or two in your system with the idea of him, coming in and starting down the line. I think that would be an absolute steal of the century if you were able to get a chance at him. Do we now have to start considering the possibility, Robbie, of him maybe lasting? What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, you play the scenario, Bryce Young goes first, Tyree Wilson goes second, Will Anderson goes third, the Colts take, Will Levis, then there it is. I mean, it's not out of the realms of possibility. I think it's definitely a possibility. I think any of these quarterbacks could drop. I mean, we just don't know, and I think that's where it becomes interesting with what Houston decides to do. And I think we'll have a good feeling after that second pick, kind of what's going to happen. You know what I mean? Like this is the draft can't get soon enough for me. I know there's a long waiting period and like enjoying it, but I'm also tired of all the bitching and bickering and people saying, I know for a fact that this is happening, or they will do this. I'm just tired of it. I want to okay, maybe we're right, maybe we're wrong, whatever. I just want to see who we have and get excited about the upcoming year. So for me, I'm ready to move on. But yeah, I think this is I think it's interesting being in the 5th pick this year. I mean, I think it'd be more interesting to have the 3rd pick, damn it, but whatever. But we're in a position where, one of these quarterbacks is probably going to follow us. And in my opinion, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah, and I'm with you on that. And I find it interesting that I've been reading comments, even in the Vison video that went live, people were going, you've got an agenda to draft a quarterback. And Adam, when has it become a bad thing to have an agenda to be interested in your team drafting a really talented young quarterback. I would have thought that's a bit like saying, you're a Spurs fan. If anybody who knows English soccer, it's a bit like saying, you've got an agenda to bring somebody in who scores goals. It's like, well, that's the point of the game. It's like, of all the things to have a go at somebody for wanting, I think investing in a young quarterback is one of the weirdest things that people have an issue with.
Yeah, I was listening earlier today to another show, and they pointed out that in 2012, the Seahawks traded out of the pick that would have given them Fletcher Cox. But no one cares about that really, because they got Russell Wilson in that draft. Now, it wasn't with the pick that they traded out to get him, but if Jalen Carter was as good as Fletcher Cox, that would be a remarkable career for him. And no one's really looking at the Seahawks roster thinking, if we'd had Fletcher Cox for the last decade, we'd have had 2 more Super Bowls. And he's been a brilliant player, probably a Hall of Famer. Fair play to him. But they got the quarterback for a decade out of that draft, and that's all that really mattered. And they got Bobby Wagner at the same time. I mean, there's part of me that worries that this is going to sound quite harsh on some people, but a lot of Seahawks fans, and I think this maybe links back to what I was saying in my last point about, if you're there and entrenched in the community, the idea of not being relevant is what terrifies people more than the idea of winning or losing. And I think there are a lot of people that are very content with sort of their 9-10 wins, playoffs. There's always a relevance to it. But it's a bit like that game you play when you're a kid playing football, Rob, where it's like 10 passes equals a goal, as opposed to actually scoring a goal. 10 passes might equal a goal in this little drill we're doing, but it's not actually what we're trying to achieve here. And there's part of me that worries, or that thinks that some fans think, well, if we take the quarterback, oh my God, we've really got to go and win now. Like, there's no more messing around. Like, this is our time to do it. And what's everyone scared about? Like, if they don't win, well, they're not winning now. And yeah, maybe they have a couple of years out the playoffs and in a bit of purgatory, trying to find the next quarterback. But I find this period just as bad as if they were winning 5-6 games, because they're not ultimately, if they don't get into the championship game this year, they'll go a decade without being in an NFC championship game. And we're probably not going to have a 10-year period of such quality in the roster from top to bottom for many, many years. This idea of not going for a quarterback, I just don't understand it, because ultimately you can't win without one. And as far as I'm concerned, we need to try and win. And that's maybe hugely reductive, but that's the way I see it. And if they win 5 games trying to win 13, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I just also I find it strange, because Mike Florio said this a couple of times now, that he doesn't think the Seahawks want to go back to a situation, Robbie, where the Seahawks are a quarterback-centric team. That the minute that you draft a quarterback 5th overall, you restart the problems that they have with Russell Wilson, where it had to all be about the quarterback. I'm not sure I understand why that has to be the case. The reason the Seahawks, one of the reasons the Seahawks were able to win a Super Bowl is because they had a cheap quarterback situation, and they were able to build a great team around them. And that's what you would be able to do with this. Yes, a 5th overall pick at quarterback, for example, would put a lot more attention on that player, and the focal point of your team would be somewhat around that player that you've drafted very, very early. But it doesn't prevent you also building a great defense, and putting a great defense onto the field to support that guy. And that maybe becoming the bigger factor, as it was in 2012 and 2013 and onwards, as to why you win. It doesn't have to just be, we're going to throw it 40 times because we've drafted a quarterback. And I find it a little bit odd as well that there's this kind of feeling in the media as well, and this is something that Florio was talking about and a few others, but it's also in the fan base, that really what the Seahawks need to do is they need to try and build just build an elite defense, and then everything else will come together. It's fine. You can be okay with Geno Smith at quarterback. People have long forgotten that he had a slightly difficult second half to last season. Just build a great defense, and that's fine. And I did the sort of the work on looking at how San Francisco built their great defense. That took a decade, Robbie. It took sort of 7 first-round picks, 2 of which were busts, to invest in their defense to get to, and they had to pick in the top 10 to 15, multiple times. They spent 2 top 3 picks on their defense within that 10 years as well, in order to get the unit that they have now. Is that what people want to do? Do they want to spend the next 10 years building a defense versus, the teams who are succeeding, who have just hit on a quarterback and it covers a lot of warts? Like if you inserted, with the greatest respect to Geno, I think if you put Geno Smith on the Buffalo Bills, what would the Bills be? 9, 10, 11 win team? Kind of just, maybe not even that, in the AFC, which is loaded. They'd just be a team on the periphery, really, wouldn't they? If no one really consider them a contender. But if you put Josh Allen on the Seahawks last year, I'd suggest that people would think they've got a shot. They could go all the way. At the very least, they could go further than they did in the playoffs. And I think if Josh Allen was playing against the 49ers, and Geno was not far from the problem against the Niners in that playoff game, I accept that. But if Josh Allen was playing there, I think you'd probably think he could probably create some magic and put 40 points on this defense because he's that good. And isn't that the point, Robbie? That if you can land a quarterback, they've got that ability to go, crap, we might need to get 35 points today because the defense is struggling. The top quarterbacks generally can do that for you, can't they? And that's the kind of conversation I think is worth having. It's not about being religious about who they draft, what position it is. I'm comfortable going D-line or quarterback. If 4 quarterbacks go in the first 4 picks and they take Will Anderson, I'm not going to have an issue with that at all. But I think we do have to accept that. Just park your concerns about Anthony Richardson for a minute. Look at the talent that he's got. Look at the talent that CJ Stroud has got. If that worked and you could develop and harness that talent, couldn't that set this team up to be a contender for the next 10 years? And isn't that what we just want? It's not a disrespectful thing to Geno Smith. The guy's going to be, 33, 34 this year? He's not a 10-year answer. He could be a 2-year answer and then pass us the torch to somebody who can take you on.
Yeah, just look at his contract. The way it's structured, right? That tells you everything you need to know right there. They gave him a little bit of money, but the contract is structured in a way that we can get out fairly easy with not that much money, and we could also, if we wanted to keep him and he performs at a high level, he's going to get his money and he can stay. But I think you develop someone behind him, and maybe Drew Lock is that guy. But why wouldn't they give Drew Lock more money then, or sign him to a longer deal? So maybe their plan is to see how he does this year and try it again. But I think if you develop someone behind Geno, it's a smarter way to go about it. And I like what a lot of people are saying here in the comment section. Just like, you look at San Francisco. They're still in quarterback purgatory, trying to get a quarterback. They've had to trade a bunch of picks to get Trey Lance, and that hasn't worked out for them. They had to go back to Jimmy Garoppolo. There's a lot of things they've got a fantastic defense, which is carrying them quite far. I also will say, like, if they didn't have Kyle Shanahan running their offense, that offense would be even worse because he's an absolute genius getting guys to run the football in that system. So, yeah, to your point, yes, I would rather have a guy that I would rather have the potential to be a Josh Allen, a Justin Herbert, or something like that, than rather just a guy who's going to be out there who could maybe get you 6 sacks a game or something. I would rather have the potential of getting a quarterback who can put up that 40 points, who other teams have to account for and prepare for. And if you think about, a quarterback in that position with Kenneth Walker and DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, that could be really good. A really good, formidable offense that people would have to really account for. And I think, right now, Geno, and this is kind of what Pete likes, though. He likes the kind of like the quarterback, point guard, a quarterback, right? Like that's what he wants. Don't turn the ball over, protect it, take a couple shots when it's open. But I think if he had a guy who could make plays, it's one of the reasons why he liked Russ. He could extend plays, make plays, running around, Anthony Richardson to me is that guy, right? He seems like the guy to be a perfect fit in Seattle.
He just, to me, he could easily be a Josh Allen type. And I think you make an interesting point there, Robbie. I don't think the Niners would be anywhere near as formidable as they are without Kyle Shanahan. Kyle Shanahan, his genius is often overlooked because of the defense. But without that ability to go, we're starting Mr. Irrelevant this year, we're on a third string quarterback and he's the last pick in the draft, 7th rounder, and he's a rookie. Oh, we've actually made it work. And, he's leading us on a Super Bowl charge. That's because of Kyle Shanahan. The other thing to remember, the Niners spent, their first round pick on their defense was 2014. They've spent 10 years building, 9 years building this draft. This will be the 10th draft that they've spent, building a defense if they take a defensive player at any point in this draft. They still felt like, even though they had this defense, we need to spend 3 first-round picks on a quarterback. And people forget that. The Niners sat there and thought, we've built this great defense. We've got Kyle Shanahan as head coach. We still need to spend our first-round pick in 2021 and our next 2 first-round picks to go and get an athlete at quarterback. They felt the need to do that. And that's the thing. And the other thing that, while you were talking there, Robbie, that made me think of is, and Adam, I'll put this to you before we get to the Super Chats. If Trevon Walker was in this draft, what would Seahawks fans be saying? They'd be saying, we've got to have this guy. He's super athletic. He's long. He's explosive. He's at Georgia. He's very interesting. Got to have Trevon Walker. Trevon Walker had something like 3.5 sacks as a rookie and had minimal impact and didn't really do anything for the Jacksonville Jaguars last year. And people are already kind of concerned that he ain't that good. And yet, if he was in this draft, people would have been going, have some of that at number 5. And that's, it's almost assumed that a defensive lineman's going to work out and be great. And that's that. People always say, take a defensive lineman, get the next Bosa, get the next Aaron Donald. Like that's just how it happens. You just draft the defensive lineman and they're a 10-sack guy straight away, a defensive tackle, or a 15-sack guy off the edge. It's not how it works. Trevon Walker, 3.5 sacks. Kayvon Thibodeau, like 4 sacks, 4.5 sacks, something like that for the Giants. Aiden Hutchinson did very well. But the other 2 guys in the top 5, not so much impacts as rookies. And Adam, I don't know how you can't be excited. You've got no soul if you are not excited about the prospect of Anthony Richardson having sat for a year or 2 to learn his trade, throwing to DK Metcalf, with Ken Walker in the backfield, with 2 young offensive tackles at bookend, and the prospect of adding more to your offense and your offensive arsenal over the next couple of years to help Anthony Richardson even further. How could you not be excited about that as a fan? Like, even if you were skeptical of Anthony Richardson, you've got to have that bit about you that just thinks, I'm intrigued by that. I would turn up on a Sunday or putting Game Pass on like we would to see how this plays out, because it's an exciting thought, surely.
Which is why we do it, right? Part of the joy of the last decade is that you could, every day that you think about the Seattle Seahawks, it's been, well, Russell Wilson's there. Not only is he great, but we're safe in that position, and that means we can compete. My worry going forward, if we didn't take a quarterback now and we won between 8 and 10 games and we're picking where our native pick is now, put it this way, take out, if we didn't have the number 5 pick at all, and this was our lot and it was 20 onwards, I think people would be stressing about where's the next quarterback coming from. They'd be thinking, well, Geno was pretty good last year, but what if we're picking 20th next year? Do we just sort of become the Minnesota Vikings, where every year you're kind of convincing yourself that you've got a good team, but actually you don't, because you haven't got a winning quarterback, and you can put all the fluff around it and the coaches or whatever, and the great players around it, but you don't have the quarterback. If we didn't have the number 5 pick now, I think people would be really quite stressed about what the future is of the team at quarterback. And we do have number 5, and the opportunity is there to take a guy that might be crap, but Jalen Carter, Will Anderson, Tyree Wilson might be crap. At least, and that there'll be just as much of a waste or a risk in that position as a quarterback would be. Just go balls out and see what happens. And let's give ourselves some fun for a couple of years, because I do think that there's a real risk of being in a position in 12 months' time where you don't have this bonus pick of thinking, what next?
Yeah, that's my biggest concern, that actually what happens next season is that Geno Smith is the player that we kind of expected him to be a year ago, when it was just kind of like, well, he's the starter for a year, and now people have anointed him the franchise quarterback, that he's okay at best, and that the Seahawks, Robbie, end up having a, I don't know, 7-win season, 8-win season. The defensive lineman needs some time, or that the defense, or maybe even that you take it, because this is something people don't talk about, Robbie. You take the defensive lineman at 5, they have a good season. Personally, like their stats, like look at Uchenna Nwosu had a career year. Darrell Taylor had a career year. So that in this scheme, the rookie that you take at number 5 could have 9.5 sacks as well, or 10 sacks, and you consider that a success as a rookie. But the defense is still crap because they've really struggled, haven't they, over the years to get this defense organized and functioning properly. The scheme hasn't worked. The tackling's been poor. As a collective group, the defense hasn't been good enough. So it's possible that what happens is Geno Smith is average. The defense is still bad, even if the rookie at number 5 has a good season, and he might not. And then what are we doing in 12 months, Robbie? We're sat there with a pick in the mid-teens going, well, what do we do now? Because we've got a choice. Because Geno Smith was average, but if we don't cut him or trade him before this day, he's going to be earning $32 million next year. So you've got a choice to make there as to whether you want to keep him at that cost. It's possible that Geno Smith is okay, but you cut him anyway because you don't want to pay him $30 million for next year per the terms of the contract. That out is important. He has to play very, very well, or you're probably going to have to part ways with him. And we might be sat here in 12 months' time, Robbie, with no contracted quarterbacks on the roster and a defense that's still bad, wondering, what do we do now? Because you haven't got 2 first-round picks and 2 second-round picks to do anything about this. You could trade up and get a quarterback. How much is that going to cost you? People just go, hey, there's these 2 quarterbacks at the top of the first round next year. Who's to say that the teams picking first and second overall next year aren't just going to go, well, yeah, they are good, and we're going to take them. We aren't trading down. You can offer us anything. Because the Bengals weren't trading down and taking themselves out of Joe Burrow. The Dolphins tried, and the Bengals said, no, we're staying here and we're picking this guy. And the same with Trevor Lawrence and the Jaguars. If people love the quarterbacks, they won't trade down with you. It doesn't matter how much you offer them. So it could be that in a year's time, Robbie, this is a pretty serious situation. However, here's the thing. If you draft Anthony Richardson, let's say, at number 5, if you have an average season, you can kind of eat it because you can go, well, we're going to move on from Geno. Thanks, appreciate it. It was a good story. We're now going to bring in this pretty exciting quarterback, and we're going to put him in, and we're going to sort of refresh things on offense, and we're going to use our draft picks to continue to build up the defense. And by the way, if you draft Anthony Richardson at 5, you probably spend 20 and 37 or 20 and 52 on your defense anyway. So it's not, you're not doing anything on the defense. And that actually, Robbie, that sounds more plausible to me. That covers it, it covers your arse, let's say, basically. It covers your arse because if it doesn't go well with Geno, you've got a quarterback there that you can build around for the future. You can sort of say to your fan base, we're going to give this guy a go now, be excited. And you can still invest in your defense and build that up, Robbie. It's kind of like a best of both worlds situation. And I think with the Geno contract, they've set it up for the classic Alex Smith to Patrick Mahomes torch passing anyway. I think it's all done ever so well. It's all set up perfectly to draft a quarterback.
Yeah, and I like what you said about drafting defense later on as well, not just at 5, because that's kind of one of my arguments. I feel like people forget about how many picks we have in the first 2 rounds. We've got a lot. First 3 rounds, we got a lot of picks, and we have the opportunity to draft some really talented players that just aren't going to be, top 5 picks. So we have a good chance there. Plus, on the defense side, I already like what they've done this offseason with the defense. Draymond Jones and Julian Love and these players that they've signed. They've got some good players that are going to come in that are tackle better, and hopefully will improve the defense overall. So there's, there are still some missing holes. People who. I'm not going to put those 2 together, but they brought back Bobby, and I know a lot of people wanted that. And so like bringing back Bobby Wagner, and they're going to need, some other linebackers as well. And they're going to need a nose tackle. So there's an opportunity to get some of these guys in the draft, and it doesn't have to be at 5. And then, that's not saying next year's draft, you have to go all defense too. You're making the right change. And then you have a guy who's sitting in the wings waiting to develop, to turn into one of these players that, we hope. And listen, I fully admit Anthony Richardson could easily turn into a Jamarcus Russell or something like that. He could. That's a possibility. I'm not saying it's not, but the idea of that he could be a Josh Allen, you take the potential there at 5. I feel like it's and kind of what Adam was saying, if we only had the 20th pick, I feel like this is a luxury pick for us. We traded our franchise quarterback. We have an opportunity to replace that franchise quarterback with another one. And you can't tell me Geno Smith is going to be the franchise guy because he's 33 and he, I mean, how much longer is he actually really going to play? And like, off 1 year, you can't tell me that he's going to come back and be the same guy and be like lights out. He might, and that's why he has a contract to try to prove that. So I think there's an opportunity to really kind of build, around a roster that built around a quarterback that has all that potential.
Trying to get to the super chats, and we'll wrap things up with the final quick run through. Blitzy says that example of the Lions taking Jeff Okudah over Justin Herbert is a $20 example, sir. If we were in a pub, I'd ring the bell for a round. I've read Stroud may not have scored well in his S2, and that's why he's potentially slipping. That's become like a big topic, how these quarterbacks test on this S2 score with Bryce Young supposedly scoring very highly and Will Levis right behind him. People and teams seem to put in a lot of stock into that. I'd not heard that he tested poorly, Stroud, but there are definitely teams that are paying attention to that, and it could have an impact for him there. But he's just such a talented passer. And if he got into range, I think you'd have to seriously consider him. If he was there at number 5, we're talking about Anthony Richardson here, because I still think Will Levis is a shoo-in to go to number 4. Chris Mortensen said he's a top 5 lock. I think Levis is going to go number 4. So for me, it's Richardson's most likely to be there at 5 if any of the quarterbacks do last. But if CJ Stroud was there instead, or as well as Richardson, I think he should also be considered too. Jason says, I feel like a kid before Christmas trying to guess what's in my presents by how big they are or the sound they make when you shake them. Well, if you shake Jalen Carter, he's a big boy. So especially at his pro day, we put on an extra 9 pounds. So be careful with that. If you are shaking it, make sure you've got a good base. There's a few others, I think, further down. MK says, speaking of character, who is the meanest, angriest guy in this draft? That is a good question. Who is the meanest, angriest guy? Devin Witherspoon's got to be in with a shout there because of the way that he hits. But he is a cornerback. So can a cornerback truly be the meanest, angriest guy in the draft? I'm trying to dig my board out here so I can see if there's anybody else who really springs to mind. Look at the safeties. But JL Skinner's quite physical, isn't he? Some of the safeties are going to go sort of late day 2, late day 3, love a hit. So I think they're definitely up there. Derek Hall's quite angry. Angry, I don't know, because there's no like running back who you can. Chris Rodriguez, I suppose, is of that kind of mindset. It's not really an angry mean. There's no like Cam. So I'd probably go with Devin Witherspoon just because the way that he hits. But thank you for the super chats. I think there is one more that I need to just run through and find. I'm so far behind on the chat, that's why. Matthew says, Rob and crew, top content over these past few months. Thank you. A deep playoff run with Geno, with Anthony Richardson in the wings will be amazing. Here's hoping. Thanks again, Rob. Yeah, thank you for all of your super chats. I think I've got to all of them now. I think that's the exciting thing, Adam. And again, I'm not. People accuse you, as I've already said, of having an agenda towards a quarterback when you talk in these terms. That's really exciting to me. The thought that you could have Richardson stashed. You just get behind Geno Smith this year, see how it goes, know that you've got a long-term solution there. And I tried to create an A+ mock draft on Seahawks Draft Blog this week. And I did one where they took Will Anderson at 5, and I did one where they took Anthony Richardson at 5. And in the one that took Richardson, I still managed to get Kalijah Kancey and Will McDonald in with the next 2 picks. And I'm thinking, if you could insert Kalijah Kancey and Will McDonald onto that defense, that's going to have an impact for you. It's going to really improve your pass rush. So it goes to show, Adam, that you can still really improve the defense if you take a quarterback at 5. It's not like you're neglecting the defense. No,
absolutely. And it's funny, Blitzy bringing up Jeff Okudah. I mean, Okudah was seen as like the safe pick, well, that's 10 years of that cornerback, in Detroit lockdown. And the funny thing is that the Lions gradually improved with Okudah, and they basically had to just get rid of him for a 5th round pick, which are basically nothing. If, and this is real sort of negative thinking, if Anthony Richardson is a disaster, the likelihood is that him playing will put you back in the position to have the 5th pick again, so you can try again. Taking these defensive players, if they don't work out, you almost don't get, they don't make you bad enough to sort of get another crack at it. Whereas at least with the quarterbacks, as the Jets found with someone like Zach Wilson, he was bad enough that you had to have another crack at it, and you keep going until you find one. The idea that defensive players are safe and the quarterbacks are the risk, I always feel that's a little bit misleading, as much for the what you may get out of it if they don't perform at the end of it.
Just seen a quote, and I want to touch on this before the end. Somebody saying, here it is from Cheatham. Josh Allen was actually a good passer in college, though. Richardson is not. Do you know what, Robbie? I think the revisionist history that people have is a little bit frustrating with some of these players. I'm going to try and dig out. I've got the quotes listed somewhere. Okay, so this is what people have heard this before, but I'm going to quickly run through it. This is what someone was saying about Josh Allen. He reminds me of Blake Bortles, a second scout said. Bortles lacked consistent accuracy, and I see the same thing with Allen. Big-time athlete, but really an inconsistent passer. I don't see Wentz. Some people do because they had the same coach. Wentz was a very mature, confident person. He looks the part and a good athlete, a third scout said. But you talk about lacking in being a winning quarterback. He's got a lot of bad tape, even at that level. Somebody will still take him high. Are we going on what the tape is and the production and the winning? Or we're going on this guy looks like he should be on an NFL quarterback and how he throws the ball? And then people were critical of Patrick Mahomes. This is what Bob McGinn's scouting sources said about Mahomes. He's crazy. He plays crazy. He'll do anything. I don't even think gunslinger is the right word. He's reckless. He's in that offense, and the way that he plays, he's very erratic. You can see the talent, but he's just so streaky and wild and reckless. He put up a lot of balls up for grabs when you say, man, what are you going to get with him? He could come on, but I don't see it. I just don't think he has the necessary qualities. He's got no vision, no mechanics. He's erratic as hell. He makes a lot of mistakes. It's going to be a long development. Patrick Mahomes. That's what people were saying about Patrick Mahomes, who is the classic fabled generational talent now. He's the face of the league. He's won 2 Super Bowls and lost another. And Robbie, people keep going, Anthony Richardson's, he's no good. He's not Josh Allen because Josh Allen was good in college. People did not like Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes in college. Patrick Mahomes, again, was not in Daniel Jeremiah's top 50 list at the start of April ahead of his draft in 2017. Lance Zierlein had Josh Allen, I think, graded at like a 5.80 or something like that. He had Drew Lock as a 6.40. He had Drew Lock graded higher than Patrick Mahomes. People keep saying these guys are no good. They're not as, can't compare them to Allen. People hammered Josh Allen before his draft, and they hammered him for 2 years in the league. He was a meme. People did not think, no one was talking about Patrick Mahomes. It was all, people were hammering Deshaun Watson, who, whatever you think about Deshaun Watson now, was a good football player until all that happened. Nah, he's not good enough. And they didn't even talk about Mahomes. It was all about Trubisky and people like that. And look, the Bears traded up to get Mitch Trubisky second overall. The Niners didn't even scout Patrick Mahomes. They've admitted that through Chris Sims, who knows Kyle Shanahan, because they were thinking about going for Kirk Cousins, people. They were targeting, they were waiting for Kirk Cousins and didn't even scout Patrick Mahomes and Deshaun Watson. People have got revisionist history about these quarterbacks, Robbie. And what people said about, what are saying about Levis and Richardson right now, they were saying about those guys as well. Doesn't mean that they're going to become elite NFL quarterbacks. But can we have some perspective that let's just acknowledge that people were critical of Justin Herbert, they were critical of Josh Allen, and they were critical of Patrick Mahomes coming into the league. That's just a fact, isn't it, Robbie?
Yeah, I think people misunderstand the fact that, like, just these guys have the same traits. We're not saying they're going to turn into these players, right? I mean, we like them because they have the traits and might have the ability to be, as good or if not better than these guys. And you got to roll the dice on some of these players. And when you see the physical, traits that they have and have the ability to become maybe these players, you got to go out and get them. And a lot of these people were saying, as you just pointed out, a lot of negative things on these players, and now look what they are. I think any team would give up most of their draft for a Josh Allen or a Patrick Mahomes. So, not saying any of these guys will be them, but they actually have the possibility to become as good, if not better, than some of them. So you got to take a chance on it.
Yeah, I mean the mental gymnast. I mean, we're seeing it in the comments now. The guy who posted that initially is the mental gymnastics that people go through to just try desperately to back up. I don't want a quarterback at number 5 is crazy. I just don't get it. I don't get it. I thought what this process was going to be is that Seahawks fans would kind of be like, I'm intrigued by the quarterbacks. I'm intrigued by the defensive linemen. Whatever they do, we've got some good options there. And what it's actually become is like a whole team of people who are like aggressively against quarterbacks. And then another whole team of people who aggressively for the quarterbacks have just gone to war with each other. And I just don't get that. I really don't get that at all. Anyway, we've done an hour and 15. I've kept these gentlemen long enough. We have 2 weeks of the draft. Hopefully we'll get together again soon. And if there's some news, we can talk about it. It feels like next week's going to be a big week. If the Texans and the Cardinals are getting out there, the message that we've had 6 teams get in touch with us, the Texans are kind of flirting with trading down. I just wonder if this time next week there's somebody else owning in possession of the number 2 or number 3 overall pick, and it might change everything again. Is somebody going to trade up and give themselves enough time and give like the Titans or the Texans or the Cardinals a chance to sort of assess what they're going to do after moving down? I just wonder if that's coming, if that's on the horizon now. These official visits are taking place and teams are kind of finalizing their draft boards, whether we might see somebody like the Titans or the Falcons or somebody moving up the Commanders, the Buccaneers or something. We'll see how that all plays out. It's going to be very, very interesting. Try not to destroy each other online in the next fortnight if you are inclined to do so. I mean, look at the guy in the comments who just accept a point. You don't have to constantly be arguing and warring about the quarterbacks. Anyway, let's move on. Thank you to everybody for watching live. Good numbers again. Make sure you like the video, helps the algorithm, and leave a comment in the comment section after the video is finished, because that really helps as well. Don't forget to check out SeahawksDraftBlog.com for the best analysis on the Seahawks and the draft ahead of the big day in 2 weeks and 1 day's time. Big shout out to Robbie and Adam, who are absolutely fantastic and great company and perfect to talk about the Seahawks with. Big thank you for their time as well again today. 2 weeks to go, people. Enjoy it. We'll speak again soon. Bye for now.